before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I never imagined that the freedom of the open road, the comfort of an RV beneath endless stars, could harbor such darkness. The places we chase for peace and solitude sometimes conceal horrors that ripple through the quiet like poison. You think the wilderness is safe, or at least honest, but sometimes it's anything but. It's the kind of nightmare that doesn't announce itself with a scream. It creeps in, slow and insidious, until you realize you're already trapped. My name is Alex, and I've spent years living in an RV, chasing the horizon across the United States. The road has been my refuge, my therapy, my escape. But what I learned during one summer camping trip shattered every illusion I held about safety out here. This isn't just a story about camping gone wrong. It's about the darkest chapters written in the history of RV camping. A history stained with blood, betrayal, and brutal murders that have scarred campgrounds from coast to coast. It started in the remote wilderness of Northern California, near a campground called Redwood Creek. I was traveling with a friend named Jamie, who's always been more skeptical than me. She's 34, a local from Oregon with years of outdoor experience, and her gut instincts have saved us more than once. We set up camp early, the smell of damp earth and towering redwoods thick in the air, the forest alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant creek water. That first night, everything felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. The trouble began after we met a few other campers. One man in particular caught my attention. He was quiet, reserved, with eyes that never quite met mine. His name was Carl. Jamie noticed him too. He had an old, beat-up RV parked a little ways from us, the paint peeling and windows darkened. Something about him was off, like he was watching, waiting. But we shrugged it off. After all, remote campgrounds attract all kinds of people. On the second night, the atmosphere shifted. The forest no longer felt welcoming. The quiet stretched thin, snapping at the edges with unnatural sounds. Jamie and I were sitting outside the RV, a fire crackling between us when we heard it, a soft knock on the door. We froze. Our RV door was locked, and we hadn't seen anyone approach. "Maybe it's a raccoon," Jamie whispered, trying to calm my nerves. But the knock came again, deliberate, patient, almost human. That's when the unease began to grow. I remember the air turning colder, the smell of smoke, distant but unmistakable, like a fire burning somewhere beyond the trees. Jamie checked the perimeter with a flashlight, nothing but shadows and whispering leaves. Still, the knocking persisted. We never saw who or what was outside. And that night, sleep escaped us both. The next morning, I found a small, crudely carved symbol scratched into the wooden post near our campsite. It looked like a circle broken by 3 jagged lines, almost like a crude warning. When I showed Jamie, her face tightened. "That symbol," she said quietly, "was linked to a murder case here years ago. Someone disappeared near this spot. Their RV was found, but they were gone." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't come here for ghost stories, but suddenly the past felt alarmingly present. We decided to dig deeper, asking locals about the history of the campground. What we uncovered was worse than anything the forest whispered at night. Decades ago, Redwood Creek had been the scene of a string of brutal murders. RV campers who vanished without a trace. Their rigs were found abandoned, sometimes with signs of struggle, sometimes eerily untouched except for their missing owners. The authorities never caught the culprit. The case went cold, the forest swallowing the truth like it swallowed the victims. One story in particular stood out. The murder of a young couple, Ben and Lisa, in their mid-20s, traveling the country in their RV. They were last seen at Redwood Creek, their campsite spotless, but their bodies never found. Some say their spirits still wander the woods, desperate to be heard. That knowledge hung over us like a storm cloud. I felt the forest closing in, every shadow seeming to hide eyes, every rustle a warning. The fear wasn't just about what might be lurking out there. It was the knowledge that this place had a history soaked in blood and silence. The second night's knocking returned, but this time it was accompanied by a new sound. A faint crying, barely audible but achingly human. I stared into the darkness, straining to find its source, but the forest swallowed the sound as quickly as it came. Jamie wanted to leave. I wanted to understand. That internal conflict gnawed at me, between survival and curiosity, between trust in my instincts and the dangerous allure of the unknown. We didn't have to wait long for the climax. Around midnight, as the wind picked up and the fire flickered low, a figure appeared beyond the tree line. At first, I thought it was Carl, but it wasn't. This was something else, something wrong. The figure moved erratically, shadows shifting across their form. The knocking started again. This time, on the RV window, I could see the outline of a face, pale and unreadable. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Jamie's hand and we bolted inside, locking every door and window. But the sounds followed, circling, scratching at the thin walls of our sanctuary. That night, I realized that out here, the greatest danger isn't the wildlife or the weather. It's the darkness lurking in the hearts of men. And sometimes, it's the darkness that wears the mask of solitude and the promise of freedom. When dawn finally broke, the figure was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a nightmare and a campground heavy with secrets. We left Redwood Creek at first light, but the memories stayed with me, the whispered warnings, the chilling knocks, and the unshakable feeling that the forest was watching, waiting. This story isn't just a warning, it's a lesson. Out here, the road can take you anywhere. But some places demand respect. Some histories aren't just tales. They are warnings, carved in time. If you ever find yourself in the quiet corners of America's wilderness, where the trees grow tall and the night feels endless, remember what I learned the hard way. Sometimes the most terrifying thing about camping isn't what's outside your RV, it's what's hidden beneath the surface. Leaving Redwood Creek felt like peeling myself away from something alive, a dark pulse beneath the soil. But I didn't escape the shadow of those woods. The road stretched out before me, endless and indifferent, yet every mile seemed to carry the weight of what I'd witnessed. After Redwood Creek, Jamie and I headed north toward Oregon's Cascade Mountains, seeking a fresh start at a campsite called Silver Pine Grove. The name sounded inviting, but the forest there held a chill that clung to my skin like a warning I couldn't shake. We met a local ranger named Tom, mid-40s, rugged and weathered by years of guarding these woods. He was reluctant to speak about past tragedies, eyes clouded with memories he'd rather bury. But Tom finally opened up when I asked about the dangers lurking in these forests, not just wildlife or weather, but people. He told me about a case from the late 90s, a murder that shook the entire community. A young couple visiting in their RV just like us had vanished from the campground without a trace. Their RV was discovered intact, doors unlocked, belongings scattered as if they'd stepped away in a hurry, but they never returned. Tom's voice dropped to a whisper. There was something about that case, the way they disappeared, the signs left behind. It felt like more than just a crime, like the forest itself was holding its breath. That phrase haunted me as we set up camp that night. The dense pine canopy swallowed the fading light, and the air turned cold and damp. I could smell pine needles crushed underfoot, the faint metallic tang of something unseen. As darkness deepened, the forest began to press in, not physically, but in the way shadows shifted just beyond vision, in the sudden silence between bird calls, in the way the wind seemed to carry whispers instead of breath. We sat by the campfire, trying to shake the unease, but the woods had already settled into our bones. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate tapping, echoing from the tree line, not like an animal or the wind. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like a heartbeat calling out in the dark. Jamie grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, our eyes locked in shared dread. The tapping grew louder, circling our campsite, accompanied now by soft murmurs, voices just beyond comprehension, like a conversation held in a language long forgotten. I wanted to rationalize it, branches falling, wildlife moving through underbrush, but my gut screamed otherwise. Fear crept in like cold water, wrapping tight around my chest. Suddenly a figure emerged through the trees, a man, tall and gaunt, eyes hollow and unblinking. His presence sucked the warmth from the air. He didn't speak, didn't move toward us. He simply stood there, watching. Panic surged, and we scrambled back into the RV, locking every door and window. But the tapping continued, now on the metal frame, sharp and relentless, accompanied by the soft scrape of nails against glass. I lay awake, heart pounding, listening to the forest's dark chorus. It wasn't just fear of a stranger, it was the knowledge that this place had claimed lives before, and it might claim more. When dawn finally came, the man was gone. But the memory lingered, a shadow stitched into the fabric of our trip. From Tom's stories to the chilling encounter by Silver Pine Grove, I learned something crucial about RV camping in America. Freedom comes with a price. The wilderness is a place of beauty and danger, but sometimes the most terrifying dangers are not those you can see, but those you can feel. As Jamie and I packed up to leave, I carried a heavy truth with me. Out here, the road offers no guarantees. No matter how prepared you are, no matter how strong your will, the wilderness can turn against you, and the monsters you fear most may wear the faces of strangers or the silence of forgotten history. And yet, despite the fear, despite the darkness, there's a strange resilience that comes from surviving moments like these. A hard-won respect for the unknown, a deeper understanding of the fragile line between safety and peril on the open road. So if you're out there, dreaming of freedom beneath the stars, remember this. The forest listens, it remembers, and sometimes it waits. Driving away from Silver Pine Grove, the tension didn't ease. It settled deeper, like a weight I carried in my chest. The open road felt less like escape and more like a thin barrier between what I'd seen and what might still follow. We headed into the heart of Washington State, aiming for a spot near Mount Rainier called Whispering Pines Campground. The name sounded peaceful enough, but as the sun dipped behind the towering evergreens, the whispers began, soft, barely there, like the breath of the forest itself. At first, it was easy to dismiss. The wind moving through the needles, the rustle of wildlife settling down for night. But there was something unnatural in the cadence, a subtle undercurrent of voices tangled with the breeze. It was as if the trees themselves spoke in secret, sharing stories meant to unsettle anyone who dared listen too closely. That night, while Jamie slept, I sat outside alone by the fire, the flickering flames painting my thoughts in shadow. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the darkness wasn't just the absence of light, but something alive, pressing in. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. No leaves crushed, no branches snapped, just footsteps that seemed to hover between the trees and the clearing where I sat. I tried to stand, to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The footsteps stopped abruptly, then a soft whisper, barely audible, like a secret meant only for the night. Leave. A chill washed over me, colder than the mountain air. I felt eyes on my back, invisible but certain. I didn't sleep that night. Dawn came with a gray sky and a promise to move on. As we packed, a local camper, a woman named Linda, approached. She was in her 50s, a seasoned traveler with stories etched in every line on her face. She warned us. Whispering Pines was known for more than just wildlife. Several campers had reported strange disappearances, eerie voices, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Authorities chalked it up to overactive imaginations, but the locals knew better. Linda's words echoed in my mind as we drove away. The Pacific Northwest wasn't just dangerous because of its rugged terrain or wildlife. It was dangerous because it held onto its secrets tightly, and sometimes it didn't let go. That trip taught me something fundamental. RV camping isn't just about the beauty of the open road or the thrill of new horizons. It's about facing the unknown, confronting fear head-on, and learning that sometimes the scariest moments come not from what's out there, but from what's lurking just beneath the surface of what we think we understand. The forests, the mountains, they're alive in ways that defy reason, reminding us that out here, survival isn't just about gear or preparation. It's about respect. Respect for the land, respect for the silence, and respect for the stories whispered in the wind. Leaving Whispering Pines behind, I felt that tight knot of unease loosen just enough to let me breathe, but the Pacific Northwest had planted its roots deep in my mind, twisting my thoughts with every mile. Our next stop was a small, remote campground near Mount St. Helens, Echo Ridge. It was known less for the view and more for the stories that clung to the ash-covered earth like smoke after a fire. The locals called it cursed, haunted by the eruption's violent past, but to me, it was the perfect place to try and reclaim a sense of normalcy. As we rolled into the campsite, the air was thick with the scent of burnt wood and something else, something sharp and metallic. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds that muffled the world's sound until all that remained was the crunch of tires on gravel and the distant, eerie call of a lone raven. Jamie set up the campsite while I wandered near the tree line. The forest here wasn't the lush green of other places. It was skeletal, scarred, branches bare and brittle. Walking among those trees felt like stepping into a graveyard, each snapped branch and fallen trunk a tombstone of nature's fury. The wind whispered through the dead branches, carrying faint voices that made my skin prickle. It wasn't a language I could understand, more like the echo of screams trapped in time. That night, as we settled into the RV, the temperature dropped sharply. Our breaths became visible, white ghosts in the stale air. Then came the knocks. 3 taps on the side of the RV, slow, deliberate, echoing off the metal frame. Jamie froze, staring at the window. I tried to convince myself it was just a branch swaying in the wind, but the taps repeated, once, twice, then a third time, almost like a warning. I opened the door cautiously, heart pounding. Nothing but shadows. No wind, no branches moving, just silence stretching into a cold void. Sleep escaped me again. My mind replayed every horror story I'd ever heard about this place. The lost hikers, the sudden disappearances, the unexplained shadows moving just beyond campfire light. In the early hours, I heard it again, a whisper, close to my ear, so faint I questioned my own sanity. Leave. By dawn, I knew we had to go. Not just because of fear, but because some places aren't meant for us. The earth beneath Echo Ridge held scars we couldn't heal, memories we weren't invited to witness. As we packed up, Jamie and I exchanged looks, a mix of relief and dread. The Pacific Northwest had revealed its true face, beautiful, deadly, and deeply haunted by the past. Driving away, I realized the lesson these woods taught me wasn't just about survival. It was about humility, about understanding that no matter how far we travel or how many miles we conquer, some parts of this country will always remain wild in ways we can't tame. The drive south along the Columbia River was quiet but not peaceful. Silence isn't always comfort. Sometimes it's the space where fear sinks in deepest. I thought the worst was behind us, that we'd faced the dread, stared into it, and escaped. But fear doesn't always announce itself at night or knock on your RV in the form of shadowy warnings. Sometimes it waits until your guard drops, until you believe you're safe again. We stopped for one last night in Oregon near a lake called Lost Hollow. The name alone should have been a sign. It was just a free campsite listed on a travel app. No reviews, no photos, just coordinates and a note. Remote, quiet, beautiful. Beautiful. That word had betrayed me more than once out here. There were only 2 other RVs in the clearing when we pulled in. One was a dusty silver Winnebago that looked like it hadn't moved in years. The other was a matte black Sprinter van, no windows, license plate gone. It was parked too close to the water, angled like whoever was inside wanted a view of the lake, or didn't care about getting stuck in the mud. Jamie didn't want to stay. She said it felt off. I told her we'd be fine. I'd grown tired of running. I told myself the fear was just leftover static from Echo Ridge and Whispering Pines. We parked, made dinner, tried to laugh about everything, pretend that we were just 2 people with a weekend left and the rest of America to see. But at 2:16 a.m., I woke up with the worst feeling I've ever had. Not fear, not dread. Guilt. Guilt so sharp it hit like a punch to the chest. I knew, in the kind of way you know you're being watched, that we shouldn't have stayed. There was no sound, no footsteps, no knocking, but something was outside. I could feel its attention, heavy like a weight pressing against the RV walls. Then, softly, from the lake direction, a scream. Short, ragged, human. Jamie sat up instantly. We looked at each other, no words, and reached for the flashlight. I told her to stay, but she shook her head. When we opened the door, the air outside was freezing, colder than it had been in days. Our breath came out in clouds. The lake shimmered under moonlight, and standing at the shoreline was a girl, barefoot in a white shirt stained dark with what I wanted to believe was mud. She didn't turn when I called out. She didn't move, just stared at the lake. We stepped forward, carefully. The earth was soft, saturated. Each step sunk just slightly, not enough to notice unless you were listening to every sound. When we got close enough, I called again. Hey, do you need help? She turned, and I swear to you, I swear on everything I have, her face wasn't right. It was a girl's face, yes, but too smooth, too symmetrical, like a mask sculpted by someone who knew what humans looked like but had never seen one in real life. She smiled, and her teeth were perfect. Not nice. Not beautiful. Perfect. Like rows of bleached piano keys. I froze. Jamie grabbed my arm, and that's when the scream came again. But not from her mouth. It came from the black Sprinter van. It wasn't a scream like pain or fear. It was a scream like someone being forced to mimic a scream. Something that had watched humans scream and decided, this is the sound I need to make now. I turned and ran. I don't remember how we got back into the RV. I don't remember turning the key. I don't remember shifting into drive. All I remember is the sound that followed us as we peeled off, a dry, mechanical hum. Like something crawling low through the dirt, like laughter stripped of all joy. We didn't stop until we crossed the state line. That was 2 years ago. We sold the RV 6 months later. Jamie hasn't camped since. I've tried to tell myself we were just overtired, paranoid, on edge from everything else that had happened. But I don't believe that. Because sometimes I dream about that girl by the lake, and every time she gets a little closer. And that black Sprinter van, I've seen it since, parked on the side of a highway in Montana, outside a gas station in Arizona. Once in a parking lot near our apartment, engine cold, windows covered, waiting. I walked right past it. I didn't look. I didn't breathe. So now, when people ask me why I don't RV camp anymore, why someone who spent years on the road suddenly stopped, I just say this: the Pacific Northwest doesn't want everyone to leave. Some things out there still remember you. And if you camp long enough, deep enough, quiet enough, they might come back to finish what they started. So if you're heading out there, to the woods past the last ranger station, to the lakes with no names on the map, to the free campsites no one reviews, listen to the silence, and when it breaks, don't ask questions, just go. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week. Just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time, I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, but mostly I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it, the cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting. But that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it, a light, faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky, but deep down I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I'd drilled the day before. Something was off. There by the edge of the hole was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a jagged line, as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine, but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice, closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice, something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned. But there were fresh footprints in the snow, leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't. And that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window, as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I only caught a glimpse, something dark and enormous, sliding beneath the ice again, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. But it was enough. I floored the gas pedal, the RV lurching forward as I raced away from the lake, the sound of cracking ice echoing behind me. The road was a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. But even as I drove, I could still feel it, the weight of something massive beneath the surface, watching, waiting. When I finally reached the main road, the rumbling stopped. But the memory of that thing beneath the ice stayed with me. I'll never forget it. The way the light pulsed, the way the ice cracked, as if it were alive. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried, and whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet. Not many people understand the silence of the deep woods at night. My name is Jeremy Harris, and back in 2018, I found myself trekking through the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. It's funny, while most folks picture Green Berets diving out of planes or sneaking into enemy compounds, I was more likely to be found with a map in one hand and a protein bar in the other, cursing under my breath about blisters. I was part of a small team sent to locate a missing NATO reconnaissance unit. They'd gone radio silent in a region notorious for its rugged terrain and folklore that locals whispered about but never fully explained. My teammates, Lysander Cole and Magnus Reed, were seasoned professionals with a penchant for dark humor. Lysander once joked that if the army didn't pay us, he'd do this job for free, just for the storytelling rights. Magnus was the quiet type, but had a laugh that could shake leaves off trees. The mission seemed straightforward. Hike in, find the missing soldiers, and get out. But as any soldier will tell you, straightforward is military slang for something's bound to go wrong. We started our ascent at dawn, the forest canopy above us filtering the sunlight into a mosaic of greens and golds. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It would have been almost idyllic if not for the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. "Did you hear the one about the soldier who quit his job to become a baker?" Lysander piped up. "He couldn't make enough dough." I chuckled. "Keep your day job, Cole." Magnus smirked, but kept his eyes on the trail. "Save the jokes for when we're not hunting ghosts." "Who said anything about ghosts?" I asked. Lysander shrugged. "Locals did. Said the mountains are alive with spirits and creatures that don't take kindly to uninvited guests." "Superstitious nonsense," Magnus muttered. We pressed on, but the further we went, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. The underbrush thickened, and the usual sounds of wildlife faded into an oppressive silence. By late afternoon, we reached the coordinates where the unit was last reported. The area was a small clearing with a babbling brook cutting through it, but something was off. Equipment was strewn about, rifles, torn backpacks, scattered rations, but no sign of the soldiers. "Stay sharp," I said, scanning the perimeter. Lysander knelt to inspect a rifle. "Safety's off. They left in a hurry." Magnus moved toward a torn backpack, lifting it carefully. "Claw marks." I frowned. "Bears?" He shook his head. "Too large, and bears don't usually attack groups unless provoked." "Maybe they were provoked," Lysander suggested. "Spread out," I ordered. "But stay within sight." We combed the area, looking for any clues. Then I saw it. A set of tracks leading into the denser part of the forest. They were unlike anything I'd seen before. The footprints were elongated, with 4 distinct toe marks and deep impressions suggesting significant weight. "Guys, take a look at this," I called out. They joined me, and Lysander let out a low whistle. "What in the world made those?" Magnus knelt beside the prints. "They're fresh." A rustling noise came from the trees behind us. We spun around, weapons raised, but saw nothing. "Probably just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Wind doesn't make footprints," Lysander replied. Dusk began to settle, and the forest took on an eerie quality. Shadows stretched longer, and the temperature dropped. We decided to set up a temporary camp to regroup and plan our next move. As we ate our MREs in silence, Lysander tried to lighten the mood. "At least the stars are out. Could be worse. We could be back at base listening to Sergeant Mullins snore." Magnus cracked a small smile. I'd take Mullen's snoring over this silence any day. I agree, I said, but kept my thoughts to myself. Something was wrong, and every instinct told me we weren't alone. Shh, the night shift. In the middle of the night, I awoke to a faint sound, branches snapping under heavy weight. I sat up, gripping my rifle. The campfire had dwindled to embers, casting a dim glow. Did you hear that? Lysander whispered from his sleeping bag. Yeah, I replied. Magnus? No answer. I moved to his spot, but he was gone. His gear was still there, his sleeping bag unzipped. He's probably answering nature's call, Lysander said, though his voice wavered. Not without his weapon, I noted. We waited a few minutes, but Magnus didn't return. A sense of dread settled in. Stay here, I told Lysander. I'm going to look for him. No way. We stick together. I nodded, and we both ventured into the woods, calling out softly for Magnus. The forest seemed to absorb our voices. Then we found it. A patch of disturbed earth, broken branches, and blood spattered across the leaves, dark and glistening. Lysander paled. This isn't good. I crouched down, examining the area. No drag marks. Whatever happened, it was quick. A low, guttural noise echoed through the trees. We spun around, hearts pounding. Did you hear that? Lysander whispered. I nodded, signaling for silence. We moved cautiously, following the sound. Then we saw something that made my blood run cold. In a small clearing ahead, a massive figure loomed over what looked like Magnus's body. The creature was hunched, with a muscular frame covered in matted fur. It reminded me of a grizzly bear, but it stood upright like a human, with elongated limbs and claws that glinted in the moonlight. What is that? Lysander breathed. I had no answer. The creature lifted its head, and even from a distance I could sense its predatory gaze. We need to fall back, I whispered. As we started to retreat, Lysander stepped on a dry twig. Snap! The creature's head whipped in our direction, and it let out a roar that shook me to my core. Run! I shouted. We bolted through the trees, branches whipping against our faces. Behind us, the sound of heavy footfalls closed in. Head for the ridge, I yelled, hoping higher ground would give us an advantage. We scrambled up the rocky incline, our boots slipping on loose stones. At the top, we paused to catch our breath. Did we lose it? Lysander asked between gasps. A deafening silence answered. Then, without warning, the creature burst from the trees below, scaling the ridge with alarming speed. Keep moving, I urged. We sprinted along the ridge, but Lysander stumbled, falling hard. My ankle, he grimaced. I rushed to help him up, but it was too late. The creature was upon us. It swiped at Lysander, its claws tearing through his vest like paper. He screamed, a sound that will haunt me forever. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet struck the beast, but barely slowed it down. It turned its attention to me, and I saw its eyes, cold and intelligent. Desperate, I grabbed a flare from my pack and ignited it, thrusting the burning light toward the creature. It recoiled, snarling. Lysander! I shouted, but he lay motionless. Knowing there was nothing more I could do for him, I ran. The terrain was treacherous, and exhaustion clawed at me, but adrenaline pushed me forward. As dawn broke, I stumbled upon an old cabin nestled among the trees. It was dilapidated, but it offered shelter. I burst inside, barricading the door with a heavy wooden beam. The interior was sparse, an old table, a rusted stove, and a small window covered with grime. I peered outside, seeing no sign of the creature. Just like a bad horror movie, I muttered to myself. I took stock of my ammunition, limited at best. My radio was damaged, likely from the frantic escape. Hours passed, and the daylight provided little comfort. I searched the cabin for anything useful, finding a rusty hunting knife and a canteen with stale water. As evening approached, a sound outside caught my attention, a soft scratching along the wall. My heart pounded as I gripped my rifle tighter. Come on, Jeremy, think, I whispered. An idea formed. I took the remaining flares and set them near the entrance. If the creature tried to break in, I'd have a surprise waiting. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Then silence. I waited, every muscle tense. Suddenly, the creature smashed through the window, shards of glass spraying across the room. It lunged toward me, and I rolled out of the way, knocking over the table to create a barrier. Up close, the creature's features were more distinct. Its face resembled a wolf, but distorted, with a maw full of sharp teeth and eyes that seemed almost human. It was as if nature had cobbled together a predator from nightmares. You're one ugly beast, I said, trying to steady my shaking hands. It growled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in my chest. I lit a flare and threw it at the creature. It struck its shoulder, flames licking at its fur. The beast howled in pain and rage. Seizing the moment, I fired several rounds into its torso. This time, it staggered, black ichor seeping from the wounds. But it wasn't done yet. With a fierce swipe, it knocked the rifle from my hands and sent me crashing against the wall. Pain shot through my back, but I scrambled to my feet, pulling out the rusty knife. "Not how I pictured going out," I muttered. The creature charged. I sidestepped and plunged the knife into its side. It roared, thrashing wildly. The cabin's old wooden beams groaned under the chaos. We grappled, and I could feel its hot breath on my face. Desperate, I reached for a broken piece of wood and jammed it into its eye. The beast recoiled, giving me enough space to make a dash for the door. Bursting outside, I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. The forest began to thin, and I spotted a dirt road ahead. A vehicle's engine rumbled in the distance. Summoning the last of my strength, I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms. An old pickup truck screeched to a halt. The driver, a weathered man with a thick beard, looked at me in shock. "Help," I managed to say before collapsing. I awoke in a small clinic in a nearby village, bandages wrapped around my torso and an IV drip attached to my arm. The room smelled of antiseptic and something herbal. The doctor entered, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "You're lucky to be alive," she said in accented English. "Luck had little to do with it," I replied. She gave me a puzzled look but didn't press further. "You need rest. Did anyone else come through? My teammates?" She shook her head. "No one else has been found." I closed my eyes, a mix of sorrow and relief washing over me. A week later, I was debriefed by military officials. They pressed for details, but I could tell they were skeptical of my account. "It was some kind of animal," I insisted. "Nothing I've ever seen before." They exchanged glances. "We'll look into it," one of them said curtly. I knew what that meant. The incident would be buried, explained away as a bear attack or a case of disorientation, leading to friendly fire. As I prepared to leave, the official handed me a file. "You're being reassigned stateside, effective immediately." I nodded, taking the paperwork. "Understood." Walking out of the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real threat remained out there, hidden in those ancient woods. Back home, I tried to return to normalcy. One evening, I visited a local bar, hoping a drink might dull the edges of my memories. As I sipped my whiskey, a news report flashed on the TV about unexplained livestock deaths in rural Romania. I smirked wryly. "Looks like they're still having animal problems," I muttered. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "You say something?" "Just talking to myself," I replied. He chuckled. "Careful with that. People might think you're crazy." Crazy wouldn't be the first time. I left the bar and stepped into the cool night air. Stars dotted the sky, indifferent to the troubles below. As I walked down the quiet street, a stray dog crossed my path. It paused to look at me, its eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Not tonight, buddy," I said, giving it a wide berth. Reaching my apartment, I unlocked the door and entered the familiar surroundings. Tossing my keys on the table, I glanced at the stack of unread mail. Among the envelopes was a postcard with no return address. It featured a photograph of the Carpathian Mountains. I turned it over. Scrawled in neat handwriting were the words, "Some things are better left alone." I stared at the card, a mix of confusion and unease settling in. Was it a warning? A threat? Shaking my head, I decided I'd had enough mysteries for one lifetime. I tore the postcard in half and tossed it in the trash. "Curiosity killed the cat," I muttered, heading to the kitchen. As I opened the fridge, I noticed a small scratch on my forearm, probably from the scuffle in the cabin. It had almost healed, but left a thin, pale line. I shrugged it off, just another scar to add to the collection. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I answered, half expecting it to be a wrong number. "Mr. Stone?" a voice asked. "Speaking." "This is Dr. Kovat from the clinic in Romania. I wanted to inform you that we've analyzed the samples you left behind." I frowned. "Samples?" "Yes, the tissue you extracted from the animal." "I didn't leave any samples." There was a pause. "Perhaps there's a misunderstanding. In any case, the results are unusual. We'd like to discuss them with you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'm not interested." "Very well, but should you change your mind, you know how to reach us." I hung up, unsettled by the call. How had they gotten my number, and what samples were they talking about? Deciding it was best to let it go, I headed to bed. Sleep came reluctantly, filled with disjointed images of forests and shadows. The next morning, I found a small package at my door. No markings, no postage. Inside was a vial containing a dark substance and a note. The truth cannot be ignored. I sealed the package and set it aside. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. Later that day, as I walked through the park, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned, seeing only families and joggers going about their day. Paranoia doesn't suit you, I told myself. But as I continued, I spotted a figure in the distance, a man leaning against a tree, his gaze fixed on me. He wore a hooded jacket, obscuring his features. I changed direction, heading toward a more crowded area. When I glanced back, he was gone. Reaching a busy street, I felt a bit more at ease. Maybe it was all in my head. Then a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to see Lysander grinning at me. "Miss me?" he said. I stumbled back, heart racing. "But you're dead." "Not quite." He stepped closer, his eyes flickering with a familiar, unsettling glint. "What's going on?" I demanded. He smirked. "Some things you can't escape, Jeremy." Before I could react, he melted into the crowd, disappearing among the throngs of people. I stood there, confusion and disbelief battling within me. Had I imagined it? Was stress getting the better of me? One thing was clear, the past wasn't done with me yet. I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. Returning home, I retrieved the package and the torn postcard. Maybe the answers lay back where it all started. Sometimes the only way out is through. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while, the hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types. Barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No stops, no questions. I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce, well, you don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it. Just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing, then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it. A soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing. Probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there, but heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. "Ben," a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. Who the hell is this? The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. Ben, you need to stop. I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank. Someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast. But that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted, maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first. Not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse. A stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty, but then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid, but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing shallow and rapid. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face, if you could call it that. It was a mess of raw red flesh, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek, a sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What had they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hands shaking. This is Ben Grady. I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. I need help. There's something in my trailer. Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. Ben, you need to stop. My voice clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. Away from that thing. Away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. Ben, it's too late. I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer, no sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. My name is Ahmad Walker, and back in 2015, I found myself deep in the wilds of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, looking for a bit of solitude and maybe a good fishing spot. I've always preferred the company of trees over people. Not that I'm antisocial, just that nature doesn't argue back. I'd packed my gear, loaded up my old Jeep, and decided to take a week off from my job as a mechanic in Knoxville. The drive to the park was uneventful. The kind of peaceful journey where the miles slip by and the radio's static becomes comforting background noise. I arrived at a lesser-known trailhead, one that a buddy had tipped me off about. "Best trout you'll ever taste," he'd said, swearing me to secrecy. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I started down the path. About an hour into the hike, I came across an old wooden sign, half swallowed by moss. Carter's Creek, 2 miles. Perfect. The trail narrowed, branches occasionally snagging my backpack as if the forest were playing little pranks on me. I laughed it off, better the trees than my coworkers with their endless jokes about my so-called hermit tendencies. As I got closer to the creek, the sound of rushing water grew louder, accompanied by the distant call of a hawk. The serenity was exactly what I'd been craving. When I reached the water, I set up camp nearby, pitching my tent on a flat patch of ground and gathering stones to make a fire pit. By late afternoon, I'd caught a couple of decent-sized trout and was roasting them over the flames. The taste was everything my friend had promised and more. Just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the water, I noticed something odd. Across the creek, about 50 yards upstream, a deer stood frozen, its ears perked and body tense. It wasn't drinking or grazing, it was just staring into the dense thicket. I followed its gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Must be a predator nearby, I thought aloud. Circle of life and all that. I settled back down, but an uneasy feeling crept over me. The deer bolted suddenly, disappearing into the trees with a swift grace that belied its size. Shrugging it off, I tossed another log onto the fire and pulled out a book, figuring some reading would take my mind off the eerie stillness that had settled in. Night fell, and the sounds of the forest changed. The chirping of birds gave way to the hum of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. I crawled into my tent, leaving the fire to burn down to embers. Sleep came easily. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to the sound of rustling outside, probably a raccoon drawn by the scent of cooked fish. I ignored it at first, but then the rustling turned into a heavy crunching of leaves and snapping branches. Whatever it was big. "Great, a black bear," I muttered, grabbing the flashlight and the bear spray from my pack. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the beam outside. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees but revealing nothing. The sounds had stopped. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish for talking to a wild animal. Silence. Then a low rumbling sound echoed from the darkness. Not quite a growl, but something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It reminded me of the noise a large dog makes when protecting its territory, but deeper, more primal. "Easy now," I whispered, gripping the bear spray tighter. I scanned the area with the flashlight, moving it slowly from left to right. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me, but they vanished as quickly as they appeared. Deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, I retreated back into my tent and secured the zipper. Sleep wouldn't come, so I sat there listening intently. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. No insects, no owls, Nothing. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As dawn broke, I emerged from the tent to survey the campsite. Everything seemed in order until I noticed footprints by the dying fire. They were unlike any tracks I'd seen before, large with an odd shape, almost like a wolf's, but much bigger. "Well, that's not in any field guide," I said, snapping a photo with my phone. Maybe I could look it up later or ask one of the park rangers. Shaking off the night's events, I decided to spend the day exploring further upstream. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patterns on the forest floor that danced as the wind moved the branches. I found another promising spot and cast my line, letting the tranquility wash over me. Around midday, as I was reeling in a particularly feisty trout, I heard a scream. Not an animal's cry, but a human scream, echoing through the trees. It was cut short abruptly. Dropping the fishing rod, I grabbed my pack and headed in the direction of the sound. "Hello? Anyone out there?" I called. No response. I pushed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my arms and face. After about 10 minutes of scrambling, I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. There on the ground was a backpack torn to shreds. Scattered around it were clothes soaked in blood and a crumpled map of the park. No sign of the person who owned them. This doesn't look like a simple accident, I thought, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but had no signal. Typical. The smart move would be to head back to my campsite, pack up, and make for the trailhead. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of something hanging from a low branch, a tattered piece of fabric fluttering in the breeze. It looked like part of a shirt, stained dark. A sense of dread settled in my stomach. I needed to alert the authorities. I retraced my steps, marking trees with my knife to find the spot again if needed. Back at my campsite, I hastily threw everything into my backpack. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Every snap of a twig made me jump. "Get a grip, Ezekiel," I told myself. Just a couple of miles to the Jeep. I set off at a brisk pace, constantly checking over my shoulder. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming before, now felt oppressive. About halfway to the trailhead, I came across footprints similar to the ones I'd seen earlier, but fresher. They crossed the path and headed deeper into the woods. A chill ran through me, not from the air, but from the realization that whatever made those prints was circling me. I quickened my pace, almost breaking into a jog. Then, ahead on the trail, I saw something that made me stop cold. Another hiker was lying face down on the path, motionless. I approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. No response. As I got closer, the scene became gruesomely clear. The hiker's clothes were shredded and there were deep gashes along his back. The ground was stained. I fought back the urge to be sick. This was no animal attack, not any animal I'd ever heard of. A rustling sound came from the bushes to my left. I turned slowly, and there it was. A massive creature stood partially obscured by the foliage. It was covered in dark, matted fur, standing on two legs like a human, but with the head and features reminiscent of a wolf or perhaps a bear, but not quite either. Its eyes were fixed on me, intelligent and predatory. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I bolted down the trail, adrenaline fueling my legs. The sound of heavy footsteps crashed behind me, gaining quickly. Come on, I urged myself, lungs burning. I spotted a fallen tree ahead and ducked behind it, hoping to throw the creature off. Peering through a gap in the logs, I saw it enter the clearing, sniffing the air. Up close, it was even more terrifying, a nightmare amalgamation of man and beast. It moved slowly, deliberately scanning the area. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would hear me. Then, from another part of the forest, a gunshot rang out. The creature snapped its head in that direction and let out a sound, a mix between a howl and a roar that shook me to my core. Taking advantage of the distraction, I crept away from my hiding spot, careful to keep low. I made it back to the trail and continued running. Minutes later, I burst into the parking area where my Jeep awaited. Another vehicle was there, a ranger truck. Relief washed over me. A park ranger stepped out, hand on his sidearm. "Whoa there, what's going on?" he asked, noticing my disheveled state. There's something out there," I gasped. "I found a dead hiker and some kind of animal is chasing me." His face turned serious. "Show me." "Are you kidding? We need backup." "Sir, I can't call in anything without verifying. Now, where did you see the body?" Realizing he wasn't going to budge, I agreed to lead him back, hoping that daylight and his firearm would offer some protection. As we retraced my steps, I kept glancing around nervously. The forest seemed even quieter than before. We reached the spot where I'd found the hiker, but the body was gone. Only a dark stain on the ground remained. "I swear he was right here," I insisted. The ranger looked skeptical. "Maybe you're dehydrated or..." A sudden noise interrupted him, a guttural sound from behind. Before we could react, the creature lunged at the ranger, knocking him to the ground. I stood paralyzed as the beast slashed at him. The ranger's scream snapped me out of it. I grabbed a large branch and swung it at the creature's back. It barely flinched, but it was enough to divert its attention. "Run!" I shouted, though the ranger was beyond hearing. The creature turned its gaze to me, blood dripping from its jaws. I backed away slowly, then threw the branch directly at its face. It snarled and charged. I sprinted through the trees, leaving the trail in a desperate attempt to lose it. Branches tore at my clothes and skin, but adrenaline numbed the pain. Up ahead, I saw a rocky outcrop, a small cave entrance. Without thinking, I dove inside, squeezing through the narrow opening. The creature crashed against the entrance, too large to follow. It clawed at the opening, furious. I pressed myself against the back wall, like the stench of damp earth filling my nostrils. After what felt like hours, the sound subsided. Cautiously, I peeked outside. The creature was gone. I made my way back to the parking area, keeping to the shadows and moving as quietly as possible. The ranger's truck was still there, but he was not. I didn't waste any time. Jumping into my Jeep, I fumbled with the keys before finally getting the engine started. I tore out of there, gravel spraying from under the tires. On the drive back to Knoxville, my mind raced. What was that thing? How could it exist without anyone knowing? Once home, I contacted the authorities. They organized a search party, but no trace of the ranger or the missing hikers was found. Just the torn backpacks and bloodied clothes I had described. Unsatisfied, I started digging. Late nights were spent combing through local legends, police reports, and old newspaper clippings. I discovered that over the past few decades, there had been sporadic disappearances in that area of the park, all unexplained and quickly forgotten. Some articles mentioned sightings of a large unidentified animal. A few even hinted at a government cover-up, but those were dismissed as conspiracy theories. I compiled everything I found and handed it over to a journalist friend, hoping he could bring attention to the matter. In the end, official reports chalked up the incidents to unfortunate accidents, bear attacks, hikers getting lost in the wilderness. But I knew better. The Great Smoky Mountains held a secret, one that prowled the depths of the forest under the cloak of night, an apex predator unknown to science. As for me, I've traded camping trips for quiet weekends at home. Nature, it seems, has its own mysteries, and some are best left undisturbed. My name's Mason Gibson, and in 2024, I found myself caught in one of the strangest, most twisted nights of my life. While camping out near the edge of Crater Lake National Park, I'd like to tell you this was just a roughing it trip. But the truth is, I decided to try out a new RV I got off my cousin Derek, who's known for selling almost new gear that barely holds together. The RV was old, dented, and probably in worse shape than my beat-up station wagon, but hey, a deal's a deal. I'd been running from my city life, or at least I was trying to convince myself I needed a break from it. A week with nothing but trees, my lopsided camp stove, and a folding chair sounded great on paper. In real life, it was lonely as all hell. The first couple of days, I busied myself with hiking and cooking, sad attempts at camp food, which mostly involved canned chili and things I could stab with a stick over the fire. But by the third day, I was beginning to realize why folks don't typically spend much time out here alone. Now, Crater Lake is a beautiful place, but it's isolated. You don't have the crowds of Yosemite or Yellowstone. It's quieter. I spent a lot of time listening to every little crackle and crunch in the trees, figuring it was either a bear or maybe a ranger who'd gotten a whiff of my chili experiments and was ready to find me for culinary crimes. Then, on the fourth evening, I heard the sound. It was sharp, sudden, like metal scraping against metal. The RV had been creaking and rattling since I got it, but this noise was different. I froze. As I strained to listen, it stopped. I laughed at myself, figured I'd probably just hit my paranoia peak, and turned back to the fire. I threw in another log, settled back, and let the quiet wrap around me. An hour later, I heard it again, but this time it was closer. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, hoping it was maybe just another camper who'd taken a wrong turn. Silence. The fire crackled as I scanned the tree line. There was nothing but shadows. I was about to chalk it up to the forest playing tricks on me when my eye caught a glint of something metallic. The gleam was low to the ground, moving slowly as if someone was crawling just beyond the reach of the firelight. My throat went dry. I held my breath, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise as the figure came into view. It was a man, crawling on his hands and knees. His face was hidden in the dark. He was holding something, dragging it along the ground with a scraping sound that made my teeth clench. I took a step back toward the RV, my hand fumbling for the handle. But the man stopped, raised his head, and grinned. "Evening," he rasped, his voice raw, like he hadn't used it in years. He stood up slowly, unfurling like some creature shaking off the night. His face came into the light, and I could see he had wild, unkempt hair, a scar running across his jaw, and a pair of glasses that looked like they'd been pieced together from scraps of wire. He wore a dark trench coat, its pockets sagging with heavy, uneven bulges. "Lost?" I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my hand trembling on the RV handle. He tilted his head, that grin stretching wider. "No, not lost, just looking for company." I forced a laugh. "Well, I'm kind of in the middle of my own thing here. You've got a pretty nice setup," he nodded toward the RV, then at the fire. "Real cozy." "Yeah, I like it," I said, trying to sound casual, though every instinct was screaming for me to get inside, lock the door, and drive the hell out of there. The man's gaze shifted down to the fire, then back to me. "Mind if I join you?" His tone wasn't so much a question as a challenge. He took a step closer, and I could see his hands were streaked with grime. My brain scrambled for an excuse, anything to make him leave. "Actually, I was just about to turn in," I said, swallowing. "Long day, you know?" The man's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, sure," he muttered. Long days. Lots of those around here." He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with this fixed look, like he was sizing up a piece of meat. Then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the fire. He dropped something from his coat, a small metal object that clinked against the rocks. In the glow of the firelight, I recognized it. A surgical scalpel. The blade glinted as it caught the light. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I yanked open the RV door and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, but when I looked, no signal. The RV was dark, and I could barely see out the windows. The man was still outside, pacing around, muttering to himself. Then I heard it, the scraping. He was dragging something along the side of the RV, scratching marks into the metal. I whispered a stream of curses under my breath, trying to think. There was a small hunting knife in the drawer by the stove. Not much, but it was something. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly as I crept toward the window. The scraping stopped. Then, a tap at the window. He was there, peering in, his face twisted in that same grin. He leaned close, pressing his nose to the glass, fogging it with his breath. "You can't stay in there forever, Mason," he whispered. I froze. How did he know my name? I don't remember making the decision. 1 second, I was frozen in fear. The next, I was lunging for the RV's driver's seat, jamming the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it into gear and tore out of there without a second thought. I could see him in the side mirror, standing by the fire, watching me drive off. His face was a pale smear in the rear view as he disappeared into the dark. I thought that was it, that I'd made it. But 10 minutes later, as I was driving down the winding forest road, I caught a glimpse of headlights in the mirror. My stomach sank. I sped up, but the car behind me matched my speed, tailing me close enough that I could see the outline of the driver's face. It was him. Come on, I muttered, slamming my foot on the gas. The RV rattled and groaned, barely holding together as I pushed it faster down the road. Ahead, the road split in 2 directions. I didn't have time to think. I veered right, hoping it would throw him off. But his headlights followed, the glare growing closer, brighter. The RV shuddered, the wheel bucking in my hands as I struggled to keep control. The road narrowed, trees closing in on either side, branches scraping against the sides like claws. Then, just as the road took a sharp curve, his car swerved, slamming into the side of the RV with a force that sent me crashing against the door. The RV spun, tires skidding on the gravel, and I fought to keep it from flipping as it lurched to a stop. Silence. My head was ringing, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. I looked up, expecting him to be right there, waiting. But his car had stopped a few feet behind, headlights off, just a dark shadow on the road. For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved. Then his door opened and he stepped out, silhouetted in the moonlight. He was holding something in his hand, the glint of metal catching the light, a machete. Long and dull, nicked along the edge. I didn't have time to think. I flung open the RV door and bolted into the trees, ducking low as I ran, not daring to look back. Branches whipped at my face, the ground uneven and slippery. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I pushed myself faster, lungs burning, legs screaming. I stumbled, catching myself against a tree, my fingers digging into the rough bark. Ahead, the trees began to thin, the ground sloping down toward the lake. I risked a glance back and saw him, his silhouette moving between the trees, a machete held low. "Mason," he called, his voice echoing through the woods. "Come on out, let's finish this." I didn't answer. Slipping down the slope toward the water, I could see the faint outline of an old boathouse near the shore, half collapsed and covered in moss. Desperate, I ducked inside, pressing myself against the damp wood, heart hammering as I tried to catch my breath. The footsteps stopped. I strained to listen, every nerve on edge, waiting for him to come crashing in, but there was only silence. Then, a slow creak, the sound of wood groaning as he stepped onto the dock outside. "Thought you'd be tougher," he said, his voice drifting through the walls. "All that running just for me to find you here, like a rat in a trap." I held my breath, gripping the hunting knife so tight it hurt. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and I saw the glint of his machete, the edge slicing through the faint moonlight as he stepped into the boathouse. He took a step forward, and I could see his face in the dim light, twisted with a sick kind of glee. He raised the machete, taking his time, savoring the moment. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I lunged forward, slamming the knife into his side. He let out a grunt, stumbling back, eyes wide with shock. I twisted the blade, pushing deeper, feeling the resistance as he staggered, dropping the machete with a clatter. He slumped to the ground, his hands clutching the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. I stumbled back, gasping, heart racing as I watched him struggle, his breath rattling in his chest. For a long moment, he just lay there, eyes glazed, his hand twitching as he reached for the machete. But his strength was gone. With one last shuddering breath, he went still. The light faded from his eyes. I staggered out of the boathouse, the night air cold against my skin, my mind numb as I stumbled back toward the RV. I climbed up the slope, barely aware of the blood smeared on my clothes, my hands shaking as I reached the RV. I climbed in, feeling the coolness of the wheel beneath my fingers as I gripped it tight, steadying myself. I turned the ignition. After a moment's hesitation, the engine roared to life. Relief flooded through me, my mind still racing but anchored by the familiar hum of the engine as I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness. I tried to process what had just happened, his face, that twisted grin, the way he'd known my name. All of it circled in my mind like some surreal nightmare. But the wound I'd left on him, the blood, it was real. Tangible proof of everything. I was almost out of the forest when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Parked by the side of the road was a dark SUV, its windows tinted, a thick layer of dust caked on the back. Emblazoned on the rear bumper was an old, nearly faded decal, Crater Lake Volunteer Search and Rescue. As I drove past, I glanced back and noticed something else. A pile of clothes. Clothes and personal items scattered in the dirt nearby. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But as I kept driving, I pieced it together. He must have once been part of the search and rescue team. Maybe someone who'd ventured out to help people until something twisted him. Maybe it was isolation, or maybe he just seen too much. Whatever it was, it had left him hunting for company, preying on anyone who got too close to his part of the woods. I finally reached the edge of the forest, the lights of a distant highway flickering like salvation on the horizon. The RV rattled over the gravel road, every bump a reminder that I was still alive. I pushed onward, away from the darkness of Crater Lake, away from the boathouse, the blood-stained ground, and the silence that hung thick and heavy over those trees. As I emerged onto the highway, I thought about making a report, about telling someone what had happened. But then I remembered his face. That smile he'd worn when he first approached me. Like he'd already anticipated every move I'd make. He knew the forest, knew the ins and outs of every trail and hidden spot. By the time anyone went looking, there'd be nothing left to find. Just an empty boathouse, a pile of clothes, and an unsettling silence that would keep his secrets buried in the dark. The RV rolled on, and with each mile, the forest receded, swallowed by distance and the night. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One local swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey, everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, alone, in the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. Hey, I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. You lost too? The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off, his clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes like he wasn't entirely there. I've been walking for days, he said, his voice hoarse. The trail? It keeps changing. Are you okay? I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. No one's okay out here. I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? The trail? It moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. "Look, I have a GPS," I said, pulling it out. "We can find our way back." The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. "It won't help. The forest is messing with it." I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate," I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." The forest. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response. Only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen, shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal, the mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. My name is Bruno Gonzalez, and this all went down in 2016 while I was out RV camping in the middle of Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I decided to head up there solo for a couple of weeks, just a break from my always-on work life back in Seattle. It felt like a good way to clear my mind and see some rugged places where cell towers hadn't yet claimed the landscape. Honestly, I had no idea just how off the grid I'd really find myself. I parked the RV in a designated camping area near Nebezna Road, figuring the isolation was the whole point. That day I'd driven hours on a gravel road with almost no one around. I didn't even see another vehicle once I hit the unpaved stretch leading to the park. To be honest, the silence was nice, a pure kind of quiet that's almost sacred. So I set up a little campfire, had a beer, watched the last light fade, and crawled into my sleeping bag inside the RV, expecting just a quiet night. It was around midnight when I heard footsteps. I snapped awake, suddenly aware of every sound outside. I waited, lying still, thinking maybe it was a moose or some other large animal that had wandered too close. But after a minute, the steps seemed too deliberate, too human. They circled the RV slowly, like someone inspecting it. I reached for my phone, only to remember there was no reception. My only company was the emergency satellite phone stashed away under the seat. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped, and I thought maybe whoever or whatever it was had moved on. But as I strained to listen, a soft scratching sound came from the driver's side door. My blood ran cold. Someone was trying to open it. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the door, holding my breath. The scratching stopped. Then, in the dim light cast by the flashlight, I saw the outline of a man's face twisted into a faint smile through the window. I don't scare easily, but something about that grin sent a chill through me. He didn't look like a regular guy lost in the woods. He was wearing an old, dirty parka with a hood that almost obscured his face, save for that bizarre smile. I froze, not wanting to move, hoping he'd get bored and leave. But he kept staring, his face unmoving. Finally, I gathered the nerve to say, "Can I help you?" The man didn't respond. He just kept watching, standing there with that same unsettling expression. He then tilted his head slightly, as if he were studying me. That's when I noticed he had something shiny in his hand, a hunting knife. I felt a surge of adrenaline. No way was this a friendly encounter. He moved to the back of the RV, and I heard him jiggling the door handle. I knew I couldn't just sit there, so I grabbed a hatchet I'd brought along for chopping firewood. The guy must have realized he wasn't going to get in because after a moment everything went quiet. I waited, breathing hard, trying to calm my nerves. Minutes passed, and I started to think maybe he'd given up. I dared to peek out the window, but there was no sign of him. I decided to take my chances and get out to confront him, or at the very least see if I could spot him from a safer distance. Outside, it was pitch black except for the faint glow from my flashlight. The silence was so intense that even the rustle of a nearby bush sounded like thunder. I slowly circled the RV, clutching the hatchet, listening for any movement. Then, in the beam of my flashlight, I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. A freshly dug hole, maybe 6 feet long near the tree line. I was staring at what looked like a makeshift grave. I took a step back, but before I could react, I heard his voice from somewhere behind me. Calm and unbothered. Thought I'd get started on it early. I whipped around, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and there he was, standing a few yards away, his face now fully visible. He was middle-aged, rugged, with a look that screamed he'd spent far too many nights alone in the wilderness. His face was drawn, gaunt, and his lips stretched into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. That's when I saw he wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 others emerged from the trees, one carrying a shovel, the other a length of rope. My mind raced. There was no way I could take on 3 people with just a hatchet. I was too far from the RV to make a run for it without getting caught. For a brief, desperate moment, I thought about negotiating, but what was I supposed to say? "Sorry I accidentally parked in your grave-digging spot." The first man stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I took a step back, trying to keep the flashlight on him. He raised the knife, running a finger along the blade as if savoring the tension. "People don't usually camp here alone," he said, voice low. "What makes you so special?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tightened my grip on the hatchet, ready to swing if he got any closer. But just then, I heard a distant sound. An engine, maybe a truck, coming down the road. The man glanced toward the sound, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Without another word, he motioned to the others, safe, and they retreated back into the trees, leaving me standing there alone, heart pounding. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back. I scrambled back into the RV, locked the doors, and grabbed the satellite phone. When I finally got through to the rangers, I told them about the grave, the men, everything. They said they'd send someone out, but it could take hours for them to reach such a remote spot. By the time the Rangers arrived, the men were long gone, but they found something chilling, a series of shallow graves scattered throughout the woods. They contained the remains of people who had vanished over the years. Campers, hikers, even a few locals. The man I'd encountered was a suspected serial killer known to prey on people camping alone in remote areas, moving from park to park, always managing to slip through the cracks. The Rangers warned me that it might be a while before they caught him, but they assured me they'd be on the lookout. I left the park the next day, cutting my trip short. My name is Harry Coleman, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college, back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend Lacey had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Harry, you up for a camping trip this weekend? Just the guys, like old times." Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. "Sure, why not?" I replied, figuring a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials: tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was remote, quiet, and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk, set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, their voices faded into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch, 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. Stepping out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak, I saw the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees. Probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over, and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned toward me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I told the guys what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "Man, you probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day, hiking and exploring the area. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's Bigfoot. Or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend." We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. "What could have done this?" Kyle asked. "Mountain lion, maybe?" Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung toward the sound. The figure was back. Standing at the edge of the clearing, it was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted back toward the campsite. The creature let out a low guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave. Now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. "Drive!" I yelled. Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. Finding a diner that was still open, we stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened, nodding occasionally. "You know, there are old legends about these woods," she said. "Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories. But you never know." We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again. Not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed the change in me right away. "Harry, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was we saw out there in the woods. Life went on, as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. Years later, Owen called me out of the blue. "Harry, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns. He looked older, more worn. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night, I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." "Same here," I admitted. As the years passed, the memory faded, but never disappeared, and maybe it never will. I grew old watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the Burkers. Then, one evening, my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. "Maybe, but there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters." Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. "I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will, but I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter. And that's enough for me. There's a peace you find on the road late at night when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it out here. There's no mess, nothing like the life I left behind, just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I used to get myself out of sticky situations, both on and off the road. I guess I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I'd left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to a distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound like something trying to break through, a faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long and quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. Problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 7052, it said, repeating the number slowly like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing. Just static. Then, the voice again, quieter this time. 752. "You need to stop." I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again. But this time, it wasn't just numbers. "Lucas." I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static, like the voice had never been at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce, maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was dead empty, nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me. But the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static, but then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. "Lucas, 7052. I checked the mirrors, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend like nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going, but no matter how fast I drove, the truck stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark. And that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist on the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead, had been for years, and yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside, "Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles." That's where the voice had been leading me. 7052. It was a set of coordinates. Coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But the voice, Eddie's voice, had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there. Something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit. The old, narrow road wound through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that. Gone. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with every mile, until I came to an old gate, rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an old military base, abandoned, decaying like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower. Its rusted skeleton still stood against the night sky. At the base of the tower, there was a small building, just a single room, the door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with that same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then, from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he had been the day he died. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eddie." He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words choking out of me. "I should have been there. I should have." Eddie's face twisted. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas!" Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop now." The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. The engine roared as I tore down the road. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent. No static, no voices, just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. But I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, it's something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. I wasn't expecting much when I decided to go camping. I just needed some time away from everything, the endless noise of the city, the constant work, the stress. I figured a weekend in the middle of nowhere would do me good. No people, no obligations, just me and the stars. At first, I had planned on going with some friends, but they all bailed. I didn't want to back out, so I went alone. The plan was simple: find a quiet spot, park my RV, set up camp, and just be. I found this campsite just off some back roads in Texas. It was far enough away from the nearest town to feel isolated, but not so far that it was dangerous. I figured I'd be fine. The worst that could happen was I'd get a little bored, right? I showed up, set up my RV, and got a small fire going. Nothing crazy, just a few logs to keep warm. I had brought a cooler with some food, a couple of beers, and some books to read. As the night crept in, everything started to feel calm. Too calm, almost. The trees were dead still. The wind barely moved. The kind of silence that feels unnatural after a while. But I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just getting paranoid. It's easy to do when you're alone. I spent the evening just relaxing. I ate a simple meal, nothing fancy, grilled a few sausages, had some chips. I opened a beer and stared into the fire, watching the flames flicker. I remember feeling weirdly calm, like despite how silent everything was. But then around midnight, the silence started to feel oppressive, almost like I was waiting for something to happen. I kept hearing sounds in the distance, something snapping in the trees, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. A raccoon? A deer? Something small? I kept telling myself it was nothing. By around 1 a.m., I was exhausted. I shut everything down, locked the RV, and crawled into bed. I remember thinking as I lay there, this is nice. Too quiet, but nice. My eyes closed and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up with a headache so intense it felt like someone had been drilling into my skull all night. It took me a second to focus on what was going on. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog out of my head, but it wasn't helping. Then I noticed it. The RV door was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't opened it. I'd locked it before going to bed, but I was sure of it. But there it was, the door standing wide open, the cool night air rushing in, the dim light from the campfire casting long shadows into the RV. I didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no voices. The world outside was still. It was as if the entire campground was holding its breath. But the headache, it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I could barely think straight. I sat up in bed, my legs feeling like jelly, my mind scrambling. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I'd just forgotten to lock the door. But the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't right. I stumbled out of bed, dizziness hitting me in waves. The air inside the RV felt heavier than normal, like it had been closed up for too long. I moved toward the door, trying to shake off the dizziness. When I reached the door, I looked outside. The campground was still empty, the fire burning low. The RV's steps creaked under my weight as I took a step out onto the dirt. Everything seemed normal at first, but I felt like I was missing something important. I looked back at the RV, and that's when it hit me. I didn't remember the door opening, not once, not even a crack, and I definitely didn't leave it open. I went back inside, heart hammering. I checked everything. My wallet was missing. I was sure I'd left it on the counter next to the sink, but now it was gone. I checked the windows. They were all shut tight, the curtains still drawn. No one had broken in through the windows, but that still didn't explain the door. I started to feel like I was going insane. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone had been here while I slept. Maybe they had opened the door after I was knocked out. Knocked out. That's when I remembered the headache. I hadn't just woken up with a headache. It was like someone had drugged me. A sharp, foggy feeling in my brain that wasn't just from sleep. It felt chemical. Something was wrong. I ran my hand along the vent above my head. The air was warm. A terrible thought struck me. What if someone had pumped something into the RV to knock me out? I started checking every vent in the RV, touching them one by one, feeling the warmth seep through. It hit me that I'd never paid much attention to the ventilation before. There were no signs of a break-in, no marks on the door, no smashed windows. But what if someone had been inside watching me while I slept? What if they'd opened the door after I was drugged? I walked around the RV again, my mind racing. My legs felt shaky, like I hadn't eaten in days, like I was about to pass out. But something was making my blood run cold. The feeling that I wasn't alone, the sensation that someone had been here. And it wasn't just the open door. That's when I found the small bag under the bed. At first, I thought it was mine, just some gear I'd forgotten about. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside were items I didn't recognize. Gloves, rope, a flashlight, a small knife, a bag that looked like it could fit a person's head in it. It was all too planned. This wasn't just a robbery. Someone had been preparing for something worse. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I wasn't safe here. Whoever had been in my RV could still be nearby, watching. I grabbed my phone, no signal. Panic surged through me. I needed to get out. I ran to the RV's engine, praying it would start, but it sputtered and died. I tried again, nothing. Whoever had been here had tampered with it. My legs felt weak, but I knew I had no choice. I had to run. I bolted out the door into the cold night with no clear direction, just away from the RV. My body was sluggish, my brain foggy from whatever they drugged me with, but I couldn't stop. I heard footsteps behind me, too quiet to pinpoint, but they were there. I could feel them. Whoever it was following me. I kept running, my heart pounding, sweat trickling down my forehead despite the chill. I had no idea how far I'd gone or if I was even heading in the right direction. But then I saw headlights, a truck. I waved my arms like a maniac, and thank God they stopped. The driver helped me into the truck and I was barely able to speak, my head still throbbing with that unrelenting pain. I tried to tell him what happened, but it was all jumbled. He just listened, confused but kind enough to take me to the nearest town. The police took my statement, but they didn't believe me. They said I was probably just disoriented, that I had overreacted to a simple break-in. They didn't find anything near the RV, no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. I don't go camping alone anymore. My name's Amas Lopez, and this happened back in 1999 in the Arkansas Ozarks, deep in the woods near Devil's Den. I'd been tracking and hunting in these parts for years, the kind of rugged wilderness only a few folks ever venture into. I'm Cherokee, and these woods feel like part of me. I know every twist in the trails, every stream and hollow, or at least I thought I did until that day. I had my cousin Nate with me, a wiry guy with a sarcastic streak that seemed never-ending. He'd say stuff like, "You ever get tired of pretending you're some forest sage?" To which I'd tell him he looked like a feral raccoon and that he should be grateful for my sage guidance. He'd been itching to come out here, mostly just to heckle me, I figured. That morning we packed light, rifles, a couple of knives, some jerky, and the basics for a day out, scouting the denser parts of the forest where most hunters didn't bother to go. By midday, we'd gone deeper than usual. The silence out there was different. Usually, there's always some rustling, birds, even the hum of mosquitoes, but today the air felt like it was holding its breath. Nate made a joke about it, something about nature getting stage fright, but I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the eerie quiet you sometimes get in the thick of the woods. We kept going, the trees growing denser and the undergrowth thicker, when we stumbled across something unusual. A freshly beaten path. It looked odd, too clean-cut and recent, as if it had been trampled repeatedly by something big. I stopped, eyeing the trail, but Nate was already marching forward, too curious to wait. He called back, "Hey, Amas, you think Bigfoot finally left us a calling card?" I laughed, but something felt off. The trail was wide, and in the packed dirt, I spotted prints. Large, almost human-like, but elongated, like whatever made them had spread out, twisted toes. "It's not Bigfoot," I muttered, scanning the area for more signs. The trail led us deeper into the forest, and as we moved, the silence grew oppressive, as though the trees themselves were listening. The air smelled wrong, too, a thick, rotten stench that clawed at the back of my throat. I was about to suggest we turn back when we saw something sprawled across the path. It was a deer. What was left of it, anyway? The thing had been mauled, guts half spilled and torn open with a force that no predator around here could manage. I'm no stranger to death or the way the forest claims its own, but this was different. It looked like it had been ripped apart in anger. "Maybe a cougar," Nate suggested, though his voice didn't carry its usual mock confidence. I shook my head. "Cougars don't do this. They take their kill up a tree, eat their fill. This is messy." But Nate shrugged, brushing off the unease, and against my better judgment, we pushed on. The deeper we got, the more we found. Bits of fur, broken branches, all signs of something big and angry cutting through the forest. Then we heard it. A wet, dragging sound, like something enormous was hauling itself through the underbrush. Nate froze, eyes wide, and I could see the fear creeping into his usually cocky face. The sound grew louder, a sickening, slithery scrape that made my skin crawl. "Maybe we should," Nate started, but his words were cut short when it came into view. The thing was massive, hunched, and covered in patches of matted, filthy fur that clung to its skin in clumps. Its body was twisted, like a bear that had learned to walk upright but didn't quite know how. Its limbs were long and uneven, one arm dangling lower than the other, fingers splayed wide and crooked like gnarled roots. And its head? It reminded me of a boar's, but with a blunt, almost human-like snout and jagged rows of teeth that jutted out, dripping something dark and thick. Nate cursed under his breath, but we didn't have time to react. The thing spotted us, and with a guttural huff, it charged, barreling through the brush with a speed that didn't match its awkward frame. I raised my rifle and fired, the shot echoing through the trees, but it barely slowed. Nate scrambled back, his gun slipping from his grip, and I watched as he stumbled, struggling to get to his feet. The thing was on him in seconds, slashing and tearing with a ferocity I'd never seen. I shouted, emptying my rifle, the shots ricocheting off its hide like stones against steel. Nate was screaming, thrashing under its weight, and for a split second, our eyes met. His look wasn't one of fear or pain, but of resignation. A kind of acknowledgement that this was it. And then, just like that, his scream stopped, replaced by the sickening sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen, rifle empty, mind blank. When the creature finally turned toward me, I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. But I forced myself to move, breaking into a desperate run. My legs felt like lead, every step pounding as the thing's footsteps crashed behind me, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I tore through the trees, my only focus on putting as much distance as possible between me and that thing. Branches slapped against my face, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I pushed myself harder than I ever thought possible, navigating the dense woods by instinct alone. Somehow, I managed to reach a small ravine. I leaped down, hoping the drop would buy me time. My ankle twisted painfully on impact, but I kept moving, scrambling through the rocky terrain until I could no longer hear its footsteps. I don't know if it gave up, or if it simply decided I wasn't worth the chase anymore. But either way, the silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the chase itself. I didn't stop running until I reached a ranger station, practically collapsing at the feet of the ranger on duty. My words tumbled out in fragments, and he stared at me like I was out of my mind. I don't blame him. If someone had told me this story, I wouldn't have believed them either. The Rangers went out to investigate the next day. They found Nate, or rather pieces of him, scattered and torn, just like that deer we'd seen. I overheard one of them mumbling something about some kind of hog gone rogue, but I knew that wasn't it. Whatever was out there wasn't anything they'd find in a field guide. I returned to the spot alone a few weeks later, not out of some morbid curiosity, but because I needed to understand. I found the path again, but there was no sign of the creature. The woods felt normal, almost welcoming, as if it had never happened. But when I found a twisted branch where Nate had dropped his rifle, the memory of that thing surged back like a wave. I don't go that deep into the woods anymore, and I don't talk about what happened with anyone. All I know is that something ancient and territorial lurks in those hills. Something that doesn't care for human intrusion. Some people think monsters live in our imagination, but I know better. In the end, I can't tell you what that creature was or where it came from, only that it was out there beyond reason and understanding, protecting whatever twisted domain it calls its own. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours, but now something felt off, the kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life, birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing, until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV, and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers, 1789. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong. Like the message wasn't for just anyone. It was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals. Just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate. I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "The signal. The numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working as my cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals. Glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7, 8. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes constantly scanned the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning, or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. And then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical, "We see you." I stood up, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, coming from all around us, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once I agreed. The next morning I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles. The battery drained faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 1, 3, 7. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. An old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device pulsing with an eerie, cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, it all crashed into me at once, an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, like something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV, but the lights followed me. The clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper, even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. My name's Lenny Mason, and back in 2007, I took my first trip to the deep swamps of Louisiana alone. I was 27, young and foolish enough to believe that being Choctaw meant I could handle anything the woods threw at me. Guess I thought I was a cross between Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. My friends back in Oklahoma always said I was just asking for trouble, heading out to unknown places like that. Anyway, I made my way out to the Bayou Teche, planning to explore some of the lesser-traveled marshlands. I rented a small boat from a local, a wiry old man named Clyde, who grunted more than he spoke, and set off around dawn. The water was dark, heavy with vegetation, and all sorts of strange critters lurked just below the surface. Figured I'd see a couple of gators, maybe get lucky and spot some rare birds. My grand adventure, right? For hours, everything was quiet. Just the soft splash of the oars, the occasional ripple as fish broke the surface, and the haunting calls of egrets echoing through the dense green. I was even beginning to enjoy it, to feel a strange kind of peace that you only find when you're completely cut off from the world. And then I saw it. Just a flash at first, something moving along the edge of the swamp. Looked like a deer maybe, but it was bigger, with long limbs that didn't quite fit together right. It paused in the underbrush, it began watching me with something between curiosity and hunger. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light. The thing's head twisted to the side, almost as if it was trying to decide what to do with me. I shook my head, telling myself it was just some weird deer. I pushed on, figuring if I ignored it, it'd go away. You see something strange out in the wild, it's usually best to leave it alone. But soon enough, the feeling came back, like eyes on my back, pressing down with that weight that tells you you're not alone. I started paddling faster, watching the water ripple in my wake, feeling sweat trickling down my spine despite the cool morning air. And then it started again. Rustling from the trees lining the bank, something moving in time with my boat. Every time I sped up, it did too, matching my pace without even breaking a twig. I slowed, stopped even, holding my breath as the silence around me grew thicker. Nothing. Just the soft hum of insects and distant bird calls. Then, just as I was convincing myself it was all in my head, the thing appeared again. Closer this time. It crept out of the trees, and I finally got a good look. Imagine a deer, but stretched out, distorted, like something half-finished. Its limbs were too long, its body too lean, skin hanging tight against a skeletal frame. And that head, twisted, almost too human, with a mouthful of sharp, broken teeth. I forced a laugh, telling myself some messed-up Louisiana swamp critter had wandered too far from its hole. But it didn't just stand there this time. It started walking toward me, stepping down the muddy bank, those bony legs bending at all the wrong angles. I'll admit, I panicked. I grabbed the oars and started paddling like a madman, muscles burning, heart pounding. But the thing didn't stay behind. It waded into the water, its head just above the surface, moving with a quiet, terrifying speed. I cursed under my breath, frantically paddling, but it kept coming, weaving through the water like it belonged there. Not a single splash as it glided along, and just when I thought I might actually outrun it, my boat rocked. Hard. I glanced back, heart in my throat, and saw it, gripping the edge of the boat with one of those skeletal hands, broken fingers wrapped tight around the wood. My mind went blank. I remember grabbing the only thing within reach, an old flashlight, and swinging it wildly, connecting with a dull thud. The creature let go, retreating just a bit, but I could see it was more annoyed than hurt, like a predator sizing up its prey, deciding how much effort it wanted to put into this kill. Then I did something I still don't fully understand. Instead of paddling away, I stood up in that wobbly little boat and started shouting at it, my voice cracking, filled with some primal rage and fear I didn't even know I had. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I thought that by acting crazier than it, I'd scare it off. To my shock, it backed off, retreating a few feet, watching me with those empty eyes, if you could call them that. But it wasn't done. No, it wasn't about to let me go that easy. It slunk back into the water, vanishing beneath the murky surface. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I dropped back into the boat, paddling with every ounce of strength left in me, aiming for the shore, for any piece of solid land that might give me a fighting chance. But it followed. I could see ripples just behind the boat, the thing weaving through the water with a terrifying elegance, circling like a shark sizing up its next meal. Finally, my boat scraped against the muddy shore and I scrambled out, boots sinking into the thick sludge. I stumbled, nearly falling flat on my face, but I managed to keep moving, crashing through the underbrush. That's when I realized it was toying with me. I'd get a few feet ahead only to hear it moving alongside, pacing me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. It wasn't about catching me anymore. It was about the hunt, the thrill of wearing me down. And then I heard it, something that stopped me cold. A low, rattling sound like bones scraping against each other. I turned slowly, just in time to see the creature emerging from the shadows, its twisted body crouched low, mouth open in a sick grin. I took a step back, heart hammering, mind racing through every terrible scenario. With nothing left to lose, I ran. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead. But I didn't stop, didn't dare glance back. And just when I thought I might have put some distance between us, I stumbled into a clearing. And there it was, waiting for me. This time, it didn't hesitate. It lunged, and I barely managed to dodge, feeling the air shift as one of those broken claws grazed past me. I swung my flashlight again, but it was like hitting a stone wall. The creature snarled, backing off just enough to let me get to my feet. I ran, taking every twist and turn, diving through trees, pushing through underbrush, desperate to shake it. But it kept coming, relentless, a shadow that wouldn't let me go. Finally, I broke through the trees and saw Clyde's shack in the distance. I screamed, waving my arms, hoping the old man would hear. I stumbled onto his porch, pounding on the door, shouting his name. The door creaked open, and Clyde's eyes widened as he took in my wild appearance. "Did it follow you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, like he already knew the answer. I glanced back, but the creature was gone. Just the swamp, silent and still, as if it had swallowed the nightmare whole. Clyde pulled me inside, locking the door with a trembling hand, muttering something under his breath in a language I didn't understand. I sat there, shivering, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline while Clyde moved around the room, gathering strange herbs, muttering old words. He turned to me, face grim, and told me about the old stories. About the swamp's hidden creatures. Things that had been here long before people arrived. When he finished, he glanced out the window, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "It's still out there," he said, voice barely a whisper. "We call it the Bone Walker, a spirit of the swamp, hunting any soul foolish enough to come too close." I left Louisiana that night, catching the first ride I could find out of town. They say the swamp keeps its secrets. But I know one thing for sure. Some secrets are better left buried in the mud, and for every soul that wanders too deep, the Bone Walker waits. Patient as death itself, hungry for the next fool who dares to step into its domain. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70 heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive, needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister, bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me, just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it, a soft tapping. No, not tapping, scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B, no questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought, some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song when I heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days, that's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking, loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time, it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open, and then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out. One voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again, the figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar, faces I'd seen on the road before, long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her. Carol, standing in the middle of the road, her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal, no way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol, walking slowly toward me. Her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting as the darkness closed in around me. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine. Gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them, carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft, rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped, the trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning, I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning. Endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep into the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Alderandaks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once, and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first and then you'll feel it." He turned, starting back down the trail. Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he'd looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it, something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the area, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened, saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare, unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time, I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough. Or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163 through the heart of Monument Valley and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first. Static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back, but steady. Like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same. And it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, the wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered. This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty." His voice whispered softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you got to forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running. Time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. Retirement was supposed to be our freedom, an adventure across America in our beat-up RV, chasing dreams that had simmered for decades. Just Carol, me, and the open road. Yellowstone was to be the crown jewel, pristine wilderness, fresh air, and peace. Instead, it became our personal nightmare. It was late September when we veered off the main park trail into a secluded pocket of the forest. Carol, ever insistent, pointed to a narrow dirt road cutting into the dense pines. "Here," she said, her voice sharp with conviction. I hesitated but complied. Carol had grown restless in recent years, the weight of our unresolved bitterness sharpening her tone. Perhaps I hoped this isolation would mend something between us. The RV's sides groaned as branches clawed at the metal like skeletal fingers. A chill crawled over me, but I said nothing. The clearing we found by a meandering creek seemed serene at first glance. Towering trees encircled us, their shadows pooling like ink around the edges. The air was colder here, unnaturally cold. That first night, the darkness felt alive. Carol's soft snores were the only sound in the suffocating silence. I stared into the abyss, pressing against the windows until I heard it, a faint rustling. I froze. The sound grew, not leaves or wind, but something deliberate. My eyes darted toward the window where a shadow flitted by, too quick, too precise. My heart thundered. I shook Carol awake, but she groaned and rolled away. "Go to sleep, Henry. You're imagining things." But I wasn't. The shadow returned the next night, lingering just beyond the light of our lantern. On the third, I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, determined to confront whatever it was. The beam sliced through the trees, revealing nothing but twisted roots and endless dark. My skin prickled, the sense of being watched overwhelming. And then we found the writing. Thick, dripping mud smeared across the windshield. "Leave now," Carol gasped, clutching her chest. I muttered something about a prank, but the trembling in my voice betrayed me. We hadn't seen another soul for miles. Whoever, or whatever, did this, it wasn't human. By the fourth night, the messages grew darker. "Feed me," it demanded, the words smeared in what smelled like rot. That morning, the clearing was littered with carcasses, rabbits, squirrels, a deer, all mangled and arranged in grotesque spiral patterns. Carol turned away, gagging. "This isn't right, Henry. We need to leave. Now." But I hesitated. Pride? Denial? Something rooted me there, though every fiber of my being screamed to run. The night brought chaos. The scratching returned, but this time it was frantic. The sound crawled across the RV's surface, left, right, above, as if something massive was circling, searching for an entry. Carol whimpered, clutching her knees. Then came the growling, deep, guttural, and resonant. It shook the walls, a sound that didn't belong in this world. Grabbing a flashlight and a knife, I forced myself outside. The forest was a frozen graveyard. My breath hung in the icy air as I scanned the clearing. Then I saw it. At the edge of the trees stood a figure, tall and impossibly thin. Its skin was ash gray, stretched tight over elongated limbs. Its eyes glowed like smoldering embers, piercing through the dark. A grin split its face, revealing jagged teeth dripping with something viscous and black. The voice came, not aloud, but inside my head, a vile whisper that felt like maggots burrowing into my skull. "Your fear is exquisite." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Its hunger was palpable, a force pressing against my chest. I bolted back inside, slamming the door. Carol was sobbing, her hands clamped over her ears. "It's in my head, Henry! Make it stop!" My mind raced. The words it had spoken burned in my memory. Fear. It was feeding on us, our terror, our bitterness, our hatred. That's why it had grown stronger. Carol, I said, grabbing her shaking hands, we have to stop. The anger, the fear, it's what it wants. She stared at me, her eyes wide and glistening. After all these years, how? We don't have a choice. In desperation, we forced ourselves to remember the good, our wedding day, our daughter's laugh, work the way we once fit together so seamlessly. It was excruciating, like peeling open old wounds. But slowly, the growling subsided, the scratching stopped, the suffocating cold lifted, and for the first time in days, the air felt breathable. By dawn, the forest was still. The windshield was clear, the carcasses gone. The creature had retreated, its hunger starved. We packed in silence, the weight of what we'd faced hanging heavy between us. As we drove out of Yellowstone, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. The trees stood silent, but deep within their shadows, something moved. Watching, waiting. Even now, hundreds of miles away, I feel its gaze, patient and hungry. It wasn't just a creature haunting those woods. It was something deeper, something inside us, and it's still out there waiting for the moment we let our guard down. The Orkney Islands off the northern coast of Scotland are a place where the ancient and the modern collide. Windswept and remote, with cliffs that plunge into stormy seas and rolling hills dotted with ancient stone circles, Orne has always felt like a land out of time. There's a mystery to the place, a sense that beneath the surface, something older, something darker, stirs. The locals know it. They've passed down their stories for centuries. Tales of strange creatures and curses, whispered in pubs and by firesides. And of all the dark legends, none is more feared than that of the Naclavi. I didn't grow up in Orne, but my grandfather did. He used to tell me stories about the islands when I was a kid, stories that painted them as a wild, magical place. As an adult, I went into marine biology, spending my time studying the coastal ecosystems around the UK. When I got the opportunity to take a research trip to Orne, I couldn't resist. My boyfriend Tom decided to come along too. He'd always been fascinated by folklore and wanted to explore the islands and their ancient sites while I did my work. We arrived in early spring when the days were getting longer, but the weather was still rough. The sea was slate gray, the wind constant, and the islands felt more isolated than I'd imagined. We were staying in an old stone cottage on the western edge of mainland, the largest of the Orkney Islands. It was remote, with nothing but rolling hills and cliffs overlooking the North Sea, perfect for what I needed. Plenty of rocky shorelines to study tidal pools and seabird colonies. Tom, however, had other ideas. "You know what lives out here, don't you?" he asked on our first night, grinning over his pint as we sat in the tiny kitchen of the cottage. I smiled, shaking my head. "Let me guess, some sea monster?" He leaned closer, his face half lit by the fire. "The Naclavi. Half man, half horse, skinless. The locals say it comes out of the sea at night, especially when the wind blows in hard from the west." I rolled my eyes. Sounds like another ghost story. But Tom was serious. "It's more than a ghost story. My grandmother told me about it when I was a kid. It's a demon, one of the most feared creatures in Scottish folklore. It comes from the sea, its body all twisted, a grotesque mix of horse and man, with muscles and veins exposed, stinking of rot and decay. The worst part? It hates humanity. It spreads disease, kills livestock, poisons crops, and if it catches you, well, you never come back." I laughed it off, but there was something about the way he said it that unsettled me. I'd heard the stories too, growing up, tales of strange creatures that prowled the sea and moors. But I wasn't superstitious. I believed in what I could see and touch, in science. Still, as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease. The next few days were spent mostly apart. I would head out early in the morning to survey the coastlines, while Tom explored the island, visiting the stone circles, ancient burial cairns, and Viking ruins that littered Orne. Every evening, we'd meet back at the cottage, tired but content, cooking dinner and swapping stories about our day. But as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. Tom was changing. At first, it was subtle. He became quieter, more distant. He'd stare out the windows for hours, his eyes fixed on the sea as if waiting for something. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged, mumbling that it was nothing. But I could see the worry in his eyes. Then came the nightmares. I woke up one night to find him thrashing in his sleep, mumbling under his breath. I shook him awake, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were wide with fear. "It was the Nuklavi," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw it." "Tom, it's just a dream," I said, trying to calm him down. "You've been reading too many folktales." But he was adamant. "No, I felt it. It was watching me, waiting. It's coming for us." The next day, Tom refused to leave the cottage. He claimed he didn't feel well, that the wind was too strong, the air too thick. I chalked it up to the isolation, maybe a touch of cabin fever. But I couldn't shake the growing sense that something was wrong. The wind had picked up over the past few days, howling in from the sea, bringing with it a constant mist that clung to the hills and made everything feel damp and cold. The locals warned me that storms could come out of nowhere this time of year, but this was different. One evening, as I returned from a long day of research, I found Tom sitting by the window again, staring out at the sea. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "It's in the water," he whispered, not looking at me. "What are you talking about?" I asked, setting down my pack. "The Nuklavi. I saw it again out in the bay. It's waiting." I walked over to the window and peered out. The sea was dark, choppy, with waves crashing against the rocky shore. There was nothing unusual, just the endless expanse of gray water. But as I watched, a strange sensation crept over me, like we weren't alone. "I think we need to get out of here," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight." I turned to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tom, there's nothing out there. It's just a storm." He shook his head, standing up and grabbing my arm. "No, it's not. You don't understand. It's real. I've seen it." Before I could argue, a noise cut through the wind, a low, guttural roar unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't the sound of the sea or the wind or any animal I knew. It was something else, something primal. My skin crawled and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked out the window again, my heart pounding. The sea had grown rougher, waves crashing harder against the shore. And there, just at the edge of the bay, I saw it. A figure, a massive, hulking shape rising from the water. It was barely visible in the mist, but I could make out the grotesque outline. Part man, part horse, its body misshapen and wrong, muscles and veins exposed, glistening in the fading light. Its head, a hideous mix of human and equine, turned slowly toward the cottage, its eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "Tom, what is that?" He didn't answer. He was already moving, grabbing our things, tossing them into bags with shaking hands. "We need to go, now." We rushed out of the cottage, the wind whipping around us as we made our way to the car. The roar came again, louder this time, echoing across the moor. I glanced back and saw the creature moving, its twisted form rising higher out of the sea, its limbs stretching impossibly long as it dragged itself toward the shore. We barely made it to the car. Tom slammed the door, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and we sped down the narrow road, away from the bay, away from the cottage, the creature disappearing into the mist behind us. We didn't stop driving until we reached Kirkwall, the main town on the island. When we finally pulled into the car park, both of us were shaking, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I didn't want to believe it. We stayed in a hotel that night, refusing to go back to the cottage. I never mentioned the Nuklavi to anyone, and neither did Tom. But sometimes late at night, I hear that roar again in my dreams, deep, guttural, and full of rage. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting on the shores of the Orne Isles, watching the waves crash against the rocks, because I know what I saw, and I'll never go back. We shouldn't have come here. That thought had been gnawing at the back of my mind since the moment we passed through the rusted gates of Big Bend National Park. The vastness of the desert, once a thrilling promise of escape, now felt suffocating. Under the creeping veil of night, it was no longer an adventure. It was a trap. There were 4 of us, Luke, Olivia, Manny, and me. Just friends on a long overdue road trip, stuffed into a rented RV, chasing memories and freedom. Big Bend was meant to be the crown jewel of our route, a place so remote it felt like stepping off the edge of the earth. And step off we did. By the time we arrived at the campsite, the sun was a bloated orange smear sinking behind jagged cliffs. Luke, ever the thrill seeker, insisted we set up camp miles from the main sites. We'll have the place to ourselves, he said, his grin too wide, too certain. The desert, veiled in darkness, was eerily quiet as night fell. Manny started a fire, and for a while we sat around it, laughing, drinking, reminiscing. It felt like old times, until the howl. It sliced through the stillness, distant but shrill, echoing through the canyons. A sound so alien it made my skin crawl, like a wolf's cry warped into a human scream. "What was that?" Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. "Coyotes," Manny said, though his tone betrayed him. His eyes darted nervously to the shadows. But it wasn't a coyote, it was too primal, too desperate, as if something unnatural was crying out for us to leave. Luke just shrugged. "Probably just a predator. We're in its territory, after all." He threw another log onto the fire, and sparks leapt into the darkness like fleeing fireflies. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind battered the RV, carrying with it faint, unrelenting howls. I imagined something out there, circling, waiting. My exhaustion eventually betrayed me, and I woke to Luke's frantic shouting. "Guys, get up!" His fists pounded on the RV's walls. Outside, dawn painted the desert in sickly hues of orange and gray. Luke stood near the food supplies, or what was left of them. The cooler had been ripped apart, its contents strewn across the sand. What twisted my stomach were the tracks surrounding the RV. Massive, deformed prints with elongated toes and deep claw marks. What could have done this? Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Manny swallowed hard. A bear? But we all knew better. No bears lived here, and no bear left prints like these. We tried to shake it off, distracting ourselves with a hike, but the desert seemed alive, watching us. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. That night, the howls returned, closer now, louder. The desert felt like a living, breathing entity, screaming its rage. Manny snapped first. "I can't take it anymore," he yelled, pacing like a caged animal. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting to the fire's edge. "There's something out there. I saw it last night, moving between the rocks." "Calm down," Luke said, but his voice was trembling. None of us could deny it anymore. Something was out there, stalking us. Manny grew worse. He scratched at his arms until they bled, muttering about glowing eyes and twisted forms lurking in the dark. "It's marked me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It knows I'm here." By morning, Manny was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his boots missing. Outside, those same monstrous tracks led away from the campsite, deeper into the desert. "We have to leave," Luke said, his face pale, but I couldn't abandon Manny. "We have to find him," I insisted. Dread coiled in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I couldn't leave a friend behind. The tracks led us to a narrow canyon. Shadows clung to the rocks, unnaturally thick. And then we saw him. Manny was crouched against a boulder, his skin a mottled gray, his fingers twisted into claws. His eyes, oh God, his eyes glowed a sickly, inhuman yellow. "Manny?" Olivia's voice cracked as she stepped forward. He grinned, a grotesque, toothy stretch that split his face in ways no human mouth should. "It's coming for you," he rasped, his voice guttural, alien. Before we could react, he lunged at Luke, teeth sinking into his shoulder. Blood sprayed as Luke screamed that, and Olivia and I fought to pull Manny off, but it wasn't Manny anymore. Whatever he'd become, it wasn't human. We dragged Luke back to the RV, his wound gushing crimson. He was shaking, mumbling incoherently. "It's in me, crawling under my skin." By nightfall, Luke's condition worsened. His eyes flickered with that same sickly yellow glow. The howls were deafening now, and the RV shook violently as if something massive was ramming it. Luke writhed on the floor, his body twisting unnaturally, and then the door burst open. The creature stood there, a nightmare made flesh. Its skeletal form was hunched and wrong, fur mangy and patchy. Its eyes blazed like twin suns, piercing through us. It let out a roar that rattled my very soul, and in that moment I realized why it had come. Luke was no longer one of us. He was becoming one of them. I grabbed Olivia, and we ran. Behind us, Luke's screams twisted into something monstrous. We didn't stop running until we stumbled onto the main road, where rangers found us hours later, battered and broken. They didn't believe us. Manny and Luke were never found, and the official story was one of dehydration and desert madness. But I know the truth. That thing, the creature that stalked us, is still out there. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the howls again, closer and closer. It's marked me too. It's only a matter of time. The sun was a smoldering orb sinking into the jagged horizon, casting Death Valley in hues of rust and amber. The heat was suffocating, even in the waning light, but the thought of spending the night at a cheap motel miles away didn't sit well with me. "This place is fine," I said, pulling into a barren RV campground. The lot was flat and dusty, surrounded by cracked earth and scraggly bushes clinging desperately to life. "One night, then we'll head out first thing in the morning." My wife Rachel glanced at me, her lips pressed thin. "I don't like it. It's too empty." "That's the point," I replied. "No noise, no crowds, just us." Our 7-year-old daughter Lily perked up from the back seat. "Can I see the stars tonight, Dad, like we talked about?" "Sure thing, kiddo." I smiled at her in the rearview mirror, trying to shake off the unease creeping over me. Rachel wasn't wrong. The campground was unsettling in its desolation. As I parked the RV, the headlights swept across a second vehicle. It sat at the far edge of the lot, barely visible in the growing shadows. An old RV, its once white paint faded to gray, loomed like a ghost of itself. Its windows were dark, save for one where a faint flickering light danced inside. Rachel noticed it too. "Looks like someone else is here," she murmured, though her tone held little relief. "After dinner?" Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and told Rachel I'd be right back. "Don't," she said, her voice tight. "It's not our business." "It's fine," I replied, though I felt a chill as I stepped into the open air. The desert night was silent, oppressive, as though the vastness of the valley had swallowed all sound. The abandoned RV loomed larger as I approached, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the dirt. I hesitated at the door, which hung slightly ajar, before stepping inside. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of mildew and something metallic. The interior was a time capsule, a kitchen stocked with canned goods, a table set for two, a child's toy truck sitting crookedly on the floor. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but it was clear the place had been left in a hurry. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing faintly. No response. I scanned the walls, noticing faded family photos tacked to a bulletin board. A man, a woman, and a boy, all smiling brightly in front of a Grand Canyon backdrop. The boy couldn't have been much older than Lily. Something about the photos unnerved me. The eyes, especially the boy's, seemed to follow me as I moved. I shuddered and turned back toward the door. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, tracking through the thin layer of dust. They led from the table to the door and stopped. I hurried back to our RV, my skin crawling. Rachel was waiting for me, arms crossed. "Well?" "Nobody's there," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's just old, probably abandoned." "Then what's with the light?" she asked, pointing to the distant flicker still visible through the window. "I don't know. Maybe it's on some kind of timer." Rachel didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. Lily, oblivious to the tension, was already at the window, gazing up at the stars. "Look, Dad, so many." "Yeah, sweetheart, it's beautiful." But as I stood there, pretending to admire the view, my mind was back at the abandoned RV. Those footprints, that table set for two, the toy truck lying on the floor like a forgotten memory. The footsteps began around midnight. I woke to a faint crunching sound outside, like boots on gravel. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but the sound grew louder, circling the RV. "Do you hear that?" Rachel whispered, sitting up beside me. I nodded, my heart pounding. Grabbing the flashlight, I moved to the window and peered out. The beam of light illuminated only the barren lot, the abandoned RV sitting eerily still in the distance. "I'm going out," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Don't," Rachel hissed, grabbing my arm. "Stay here." Before I could respond, the whispers started, low and indistinct. They seemed to come from all around us, weaving through the darkness like a sinister melody. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. Lily began to stir in her bunk. "Who's talking?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Nobody," Rachel said quickly, pulling her close. "Just go back to sleep." The whispers grew louder, and with them came a knocking, a soft, deliberate tap on the RV door. Knock, knock, knock. I stepped forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The knocking stopped, replaced by a deep, suffocating silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow darting between the RVs, too fast to follow. My breath caught as the flickering light inside the abandoned RV flared brighter, casting a sickly glow that seemed to pulse in time with the whispers. I slammed the curtain shut and turned to Rachel. "We're leaving now." Packing in the dark was frantic and messy. Rachel kept Lily close, whispering reassurances, while I started the engine. The RV roared to life and I threw it into gear. The tires spun in the loose dirt as we pulled away. I risked one last glance at the abandoned RV. The light inside was gone, replaced by total darkness. But in the glow of our taillights, I saw the outline of a figure standing in the doorway, watching us leave. The highway stretched endlessly before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the barren desert. I drove without stopping, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The whispers still echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck. "Dad?" Lily's voice broke the silence. "Why does our RV look so old?" I frowned, glancing at the dashboard. It was the same as it had always been, wasn't it? But as I scanned the interior, my heart sank. The walls were faded, the upholstery frayed, dust coated the surfaces, and the photos taped to the fridge, they weren't ours. A family of 3 stared back at me, a man, a woman, and a girl about Lily's age. I slammed on the brakes, the RV skidding to a stop. Rachel gasped, clutching Lily tightly. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice shaking. I pointed to the photos, unable to speak. Slowly, Rachel rose from her seat and peeled one off the fridge. Her face went pale. That's us," she whispered. "But I don't remember taking this." I grabbed the photo, my hands trembling. It was us, standing in front of a canyon, smiling as if nothing was wrong. But there was something off about our eyes, just like the photos in the abandoned RV. They seemed to follow me, cold and lifeless. The knocking started again, soft at first, then more insistent. It came from everywhere. The doors, the windows, even the roof. The whispers returned, louder this time, their words clearer, but still indecipherable. Rachel screamed as the lights flickered, casting the RV in erratic shadows. I threw the RV into gear and floored it, desperate to outrun whatever was chasing us. But no matter how far we drove, the knocking didn't stop. By dawn, we reached a small diner on the edge of a gas station. The lot was empty, save for a couple of dusty pickups. I parked the RV and stumbled outside, gasping for air. The sun was a relief, its warmth chasing away the night's terror. Rachel joined me, holding Lily, who was still half asleep. "What happened back there?" she asked, her voice raw. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're not going back." As we walked toward the diner, I glanced over my shoulder at the RV in the morning light. It looked perfectly normal, new, clean, and ours. But I knew better. Deep inside, I felt it watching, waiting. And when I looked closer, I saw them, faint, muddy handprints on the door. The sun had just begun to crest over the jagged peaks of Glacier National Park when I arrived at the trailhead, its light spilling over the rugged landscape like liquid gold. The crisp Montana air, heavy with the scent of pine and earth, filled my lungs. Towering mountains rose around me, their jagged peaks cutting into an impossibly perfect blue sky. It took my breath away, the kind of raw, untouched beauty I had come for. I parked my RV in the corner of the remote lot, the only other vehicle a dusty old truck. The place felt alive, yet eerily silent, as if the very forest was holding its breath. I slung my camera over my shoulder and set out into the wilderness, eager to capture the elusive wildlife and untouched beauty of this isolated haven. The first few hours were everything I'd hoped for. I followed the well-marked trail, stopping often to snap photos of deer grazing in the meadow, the sun piercing through the canopy in golden rays, and a pair of hawks circling high above. My camera felt like an extension of my hand, each click a fleeting moment preserved in time. But as the day wore on, something began to shift. By mid-afternoon, the trail narrowed, winding deeper into the heart of the woods. The air grew still. The distant chatter of birds and the rustling of small creatures had faded into nothingness. The wind itself seemed to avoid this part of the forest. A heavy, unnatural silence hung over the trees, pressing in on me. I checked my GPS. The map on the screen matched the trail markers perfectly, and I noted the route back to the RV park. But still, unease crept up my spine, like invisible eyes were watching me. I shook it off. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? True solitude, far from the hum of cities. By dusk, I decided it was time to head back. The golden light began to fade, the the forest transforming into something darker, more foreboding. The shadows stretched, twisting with unnatural precision. My GPS led me confidently at first, but as I neared the edge of the RV park, I froze. The lot, my lot, was gone. I stood where it should have been, the open space I had parked in earlier that day, but instead the ground was swallowed by dense, gnarled pines, their branches clawing at the twilight sky like twisted fingers. I spun around, pulse quickening, my eyes darting for anything familiar. But the lot, the RV, the truck, they were gone. My GPS flickered, the map glitching between my location and a blank grid. Panic gripped me. I checked my phone. No signal. The paper map in my pack offered little help. It confirmed what I already knew. I was lost. I retraced my steps, but the trail was gone. The undergrowth had overtaken it, thick and bristling with the kind of darkness that feels alive, watching. The forest had shifted, its paths twisting and bending like a maze, a living thing that was actively hiding the way out. I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. Okay, stay calm. You have a flashlight, plenty of water. You'll figure it out. I glanced at my camera, the only thing still tethering me to reality. Flipping through the photos, I traced my steps backward, hoping to find a clue. The meadow, the hawks, the sunlit trees, each image a breadcrumb, a proof that I hadn't imagined the trail. Maybe if I followed them in reverse, I'd find my way back. The first photo led me to the meadow. It was darker now, the long grasses swaying under an unseen breeze. Something felt off. The air was heavier, the shadows stretching longer, deeper. My camera flashed. The meadow was empty, but as I lowered the camera, I saw it. A figure standing at the far edge of the clearing. Too far to make out clearly. It was tall and thin, its outline distorted like heat rising off asphalt. Hello? My voice broke the suffocating stillness, but the figure didn't move. I stepped closer, raising my camera again, but when I looked through the lens, the meadow was empty once more. The figure was gone. The next photo led me to the hawk roost near a towering pine, but the trail had changed. There was no fork anymore, just a narrow path that stretched deep into the growing darkness. The pine tree loomed larger than before, its trunk scarred with deep grooves, like claw marks, forming symbols I didn't recognize. The air grew colder, oppressive. As I passed the tree, I felt something brush against my arm, a low-hanging branch, I thought. But when I turned, there was nothing there. The path ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but my photos confirmed I was on the right track. Then came the knocking. At first it was faint, like someone tapping on wood. I froze, straining to hear. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the trees. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a summons. Who's there? I shouted, gripping my flashlight tightly, my voice trembling. The knocking stopped, but as I turned to continue, it began again. Closer this time. The final photo was of the trailhead itself, the RV, the lot, everything in its place. I followed the images step by step, but when I reached what should have been the end, there was no clearing, no RV, no truck, only more trees, twisted, contorted trunks that reached out like claws, pulling at the earth. I dropped to my knees, gripping my camera like a lifeline, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The forest, it was alive, shifting, watching, waiting. In desperation, I scrolled through the photos again. That's when I noticed it, the figure. It had been there all along, hidden just at the edge of every frame, a shadow blending into the trees, growing closer with every shot, until now, I could see it clearly. It wasn't just following me. It had been there, waiting from the very beginning. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the photos before I heard it again. The knocking. This time it wasn't just a sound. It was everywhere, surrounding me, loud and relentless. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, too quick to focus on, moving with a mind of their own. Then came the voice. Not a sound, but a presence. Something pressing into my mind, demanding something. No, it wanted me. "You can't have me," I shouted, though my voice cracked under the weight of my terror. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. And there it was. The figure, standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam, its limbs stretched impossibly long, writhing like smoke. Its hollow face was inches from mine. It raised a long, spindly arm and pointed toward the camera. I didn't understand at first. Then I remembered the last photo. The RV. The lot. The truck. It was all there, but something had changed. The trees in the background were closer now, their branches stretching out as if to swallow the scene whole. The photo wasn't just an image, it was a map, a guide to where I needed to go. I turned and ran. The forest fought me with every step. Roots tangled around my feet, branches clawed at my face, but I didn't stop. My flashlight flickered wildly as I ran, guided by the path burned into my memory. When I burst into the clearing, my RV was there. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The knocking started again, louder this time, shaking the ground beneath me. The figure emerged from the shadows, towering and writhing. It wanted me to leave something behind, a part of myself. I scrambled into the RV, slamming the door behind me. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, rattling the windows. My camera lay heavy in my hands. I knew what I had to do. I opened the camera and pulled out the memory card. The photos. My work, my memories. The proof that I had ever been here. But the forest had claimed its price, and this was the only thing I could give. I stepped outside, holding the card tightly in my hand. The figure loomed over me, its hollow face inches from mine. I dropped the card at its feet. The knocking ceased, the forest fell silent. I started the RV. The engine roared to life without hesitation. The lot was exactly as it had been that morning. The trailhead visible in my rearview mirror. I drove without looking back, the road winding through the mountains as dawn broke over the peaks. But as the sun rose higher, I noticed something strange. The trees along the roadside were marked with symbols, deep grooves carved into the bark, just like the ones on the towering pine. The forest hadn't let me go. Not completely. And deep down, I knew it never would.